up to Joliet. Joliet, you take the trains up to Camp Douglas on the south side of Chicago. Now, Camp Douglas was located right on Lake Michigan in front of what is now the Museum of Science and Industry on the south side of Chicago along Lake Michigan. 1861, 1862 was a very, very cold winter. And when Camp Douglas opened, it was just a bunch of open land. It was donated by Stephen Douglas, who had just been defeated by Lincoln in the previous election. He donated his personal property for the first Civil War camp in this area. And it was a training camp. So they had very temporary housing was thrown together, very poor heating in those houses, and you know how cold it can be along Lake Michigan in the wintertime. Well, they spent the entire winter in those conditions. And every day the men and boys from the 53rd Illinois were marching and drilling and marching, learning different formations, learning how to take command. Hitting Cushman as their reward for raising this new regiment were named the colonel. William Cushman was the first colonel of the regiment, and Daniel Hitt was named the lieutenant colonel. So while the men are drilling and marching and drilling, they are learning how to give commands or learning how to do the paperwork, all the protocol. So it's kind of like a basic training. And at first, the young men from LaSalle County were having fun. You can see it in the letters that they wrote home. You know, they loved being soldiers, and you know, they thought they were going to go to war and have all these great tales to tell when they came home. And you can tell they were excited. But after a couple, 3 weeks of doing nothing but marching and drilling and marching in freezing cold weather, the letters started changing to nothing but complaining about the conditions, and this isn't why we joined the Army. The war's going to be over before we get to see the elephant, which was their term for being in battle. Excuse me. So they're starting to complain, and it went from bad to worse in mid-February. In mid-February, General Grant had a big victory at Fort Donelson in Tennessee. He captured 8,000 soldiers, and the Army had nowhere to put them. So they sent them to Camp Douglas, and they turned Camp Douglas into a prisoner of war camp. So now while they're marching and drilling and marching, in their spare time they're babysitting a bunch of prisoners that just got sent up from Fort Donelson, to the Battle of Fort Donelson. So they complained even more. On March 23rd, they got their wish though. They got told that they were going to join Grant's army, and as soon as possible join him in Middle Tennessee. So they boarded the trains, they went down to St. Louis, they marched through southern Illinois, they marched through Kentucky, they marched into Tennessee. They caught up with Grant's army on April 7th, 1862. Any Civil War buffs here know what April 6th, April 7th, 1862 was? That was the Battle of Shiloh. That was the biggest, worst battle that ever happened on this continent up to that point. That was the first Civil War battle where the casualties were listed in the thousands instead of the hundreds or dozens. And the nation was shocked, both North and South. 23,000 killed and missing and wounded in one battle. Those numbers, Chancellorsville, Fredericksburg, and Gettysburg hadn't happened yet. So 23,000 casualties in one battle. Right up front.
From the center.
There you go. So 23,000 was unheard of. It was inconceivable. The boys from LaSalle County all of a sudden got a taste of the reality of war. Fortunately for them, they arrived on April 7th too late to partake in the Battle of Shiloh. They got there, Grant had already turned the tide and had the Confederates on the run, and they were just kept in reserve. So good for them. But they saw sights that young men and boys, farm boys from LaSalle County should never have to see. They buried hundreds of dead bodies over the next 10 days. They helped and did what they could in the hospital tents, trying to help out. they saw piles of amputated arms and legs waist high. Those kids were stunned, because they were told just a few months ago how glorious war was and how, you know, they only saw the rosy picture. Well, now they saw the realities of war. And those same kids that were writing letters home a couple weeks ago, complaining about marching and drilling and drilling and marching, were wishing they were back at Camp Douglas in Chicago. But now the 53rd was attached to Grant's Army, and they were going to be with Grant's Army until Grant became the general commander of the entire army. But they were down there with him, and in the next 13 months, from April 62 to July of 63, they were with them at Corinth, the Second Battle of Fort Donelson, LaGrange, Holly Springs, Davis's Bridge, Apache River, the Battle of Memphis. It's a lot of battles in 13 months. And this whole time, Grant is trying to work his way to Vicksburg, because that is his main objective, is to take Vicksburg that was guarding the Mississippi River. And the 53rd Illinois was with him in all those battles. Sergeant George Poundstone was carrying this flag in every one of those battles. So we'll leave the 53rd right there. We've got them with Grant's Army, May of 63, and he's knocking on the door to get to Vicksburg after all those battles down in Tennessee. Let's talk about George Poundstone. George Poundstone was born in Fayette County, Pennsylvania in 1829. So when he enlisted on October 16th, 1862, he would have been, what, 33 years old. That's very old for a Civil War soldier. He would have probably been one of the oldest in the entire regiment. I haven't actually gone through all the names and seen how many, but I'm sure there probably weren't more than 10 that were in their 30s. He had to be a very good soldier, because immediately when they got to Camp Douglas, Hitt and Cushman made the decision to make him corporal of Company C. So we know he was one of the first 300 to enlist, because he was in Company C. You know, first 100 was Company A, second B, third 100 would be Company C. So we know he was one of the first to enlist. He and two of his brothers enlisted with him. So there were all three in the 53rd Illinois. One brother was in the cavalry. George and his other brother were in Company C in the infantry. So he was made a corporal of Company C. So he had to be a good soldier. He had to be very well respected. But then he was also nominated to serve in the Color Guard unit. Now the Color Guard unit is made up of 10 men. You have 2 flags, and each flag would have 4 guards. So there'd be 5 men per flag, so that's your 10 men for the Color Guard unit. So he was nominated to be one of the 10 men in the Color Guard unit, and those 10 men selected George Poundstone to be the sergeant, the color sergeant, head of the Color Guard unit. So he had his duties as a soldier, he had his duties as a corporal of his company, and now he's got added duties as the sergeant of the Color Guard unit. Which basically meant he had, as other ones dropped out, wounded or killed, he had to recruit people to replace them. He had to train. They had their own little training sessions and things. So he was a busy guy. He carried this flag with him from the time they were at Camp Douglas, July 1st, or January 1st, 1862, until the day he was wounded, which was July 12th, 1863. 18 months instead of a rifle. On all the marches, every day he carried this flag. He slept with this flag every night. Men were very, very selective as to who they let be in charge of their regimental flags, because it was an honor to carry this flag. You know, you have 10 companies that didn't know each other. People in Marseilles did not know anybody that lived in Tonica, because nobody traveled more than 10 or 12 miles from their home on a regular basis. They knew that little piece of the world very well. They knew every barn, every house, every creek, every fishing hole, but they didn't know anybody in Tonica or Seneca or Serena. You know, they just knew the little piece of wood. But the one thing they all had in common was these flags. So, take another quick drink.